Hi, I'm Caitlin Deaver. I'm playing the role of Rachel.
Hi, I'm Wolfhard, and I play the role of Ziggy.
Hi, I'm Jesse Eisenberg, and I'm playing Nathan in the new Audible original, When You Finish Saving the World. I conceived this story exclusively for Audible and for this medium. It's the story of a family, a father, mother, and a son. And we meet them in 3 separate decades where they're each telling their story. What listeners will be hearing is actually the characters making a recording for somebody. And so there's no narration, there's no third person. It's all essentially kind of monologue form. And only at the end, after you hear these 3 separate stories that are told non-linearly, are you able to kind of fit this puzzle of a family together.
Hi, I'm Angelique Jackson, film and media reporter at Variety. Today we have a panel about the Audible original drama, When You Finish Saving the World, with creator and performer Jesse Eisenberg, actor and musician Finn Wolfhard, and the executive vice president and head of US content at Audible, Rachel Ghiazza. Well, thank you for joining us virtually, which kind of works out seeing as this Audible original drama was in some respects produced sort of this way. Jesse, let's start at the beginning. Can you talk about this project's inception and how this story came to you?
Yeah, it came about in such a strange way. I met with the wonderful people of Audible who were curious about recording a play I had written, and I think I was like 5 minutes early to the meeting, so I was there with my agent, and she said, they're also doing this incredible like original series where they're having like original content written for them through kind of a variety of structures and formats. And she said, if you have anything, pitch it to them here. And so I said, I've always wanted to tell this story about a young father who doesn't feel anything for his child. I was a new father, and I was like the coolest thing I had experienced. And, I kind of felt for people who don't have that same experience. And so when I met with the executives at Audible, I pitched them this idea, and I said, I think it would actually work for your format because, it can be kind of like an audio diary of this guy's life experiences. It's a story that I've always wanted to tell, but I knew it wouldn't work in theater because it would just be monologues, and I knew it wouldn't work in a movie because there was no one shooting at each other or running around. And so they said they liked the idea, and so I started writing from the perspective of a new father who has no connection to his child and is distraught over that. And then the story kind of just snowballed from there, and then I ended up writing, a story that took place over the course of three decades, different generations, about this small family.
So Rachel, what was it for the Audible team that made this a good project to collaborate on?
Yeah, I mean, we were big fans. I think Jesse did a project that we had before this one, which was a collection of short stories. And we just thought they played so well in audio, and we were super interested. Our favorite mix is finding someone who's like naturally creative, but has something, that they've been thinking about or dreaming about that maybe haven't found a format or a way that works. So it was actually a perfect kismet where we were like, you've done things in audio that we think were really great that our customers loved, but have you ever thought of doing anything in audio first? And so when that question was posed and the answer was yes, obviously we were super excited to go a little bit deeper and hear more about it. And as we've been, moving into the original space, this is the kind of project that we're the most excited about. I think the thing about audio that is so fascinating is it's a much more intimate format, and it gives creators an opportunity to, I think, reach audience in a different way. And I felt like Jesse really embraced that format in such a beautiful way. And I think you hear that when you listen to the story. You really feel like you're present and a part of it. And that's something different, I think, that you get in audio that you maybe don't get from another format.
Yeah, let's talk about this format a little bit. I know, Jesse, you just kind of described the story as being told through these audio diaries, but you guys get to play with a lot of things here. There's even a bit of a musical element at times. Kind of explain to me how you crafted the story around being able to do so many different things.
Yeah, well, what I loved about this format is it didn't feel like there was like a canon that I felt like I would either be compared to or had to adhere to. And so it just kind of like was incredibly inspiring to start thinking of, if I was writing something just for audio, how can I kind of take full advantage of that medium? So I created these 3 different forms of audio recording. My character, who I play, is recording in modern day, and so he's recording on his iPhone, which is how I would record any voice memo right now. Then we go 15 years in the future, and that the character that Finn is playing so wonderfully, and a bot therapist in school in the year 2032. And the bot therapist, that it's like a kind of guidance counselor at school, but it's a bot, and so it's just recording his. So we're hearing that audio, and it has a slightly different mastering to kind of seem slightly futuristic. The sounds are different. The experience of speaking to it is different, because in the future that's quite a common thing to kind of speak to your, smart assistant or whatever. And then we jump back to the year 2002. It's right before the invasion in Iraq, and this young woman is on the campus of a liberal university. Her love of her life is deployed overseas, and she's sending in these cassette tapes. And so we have a different kind of recording format. She's sending these old cassette tapes that she records on her, little recorder. And then I was thinking, well, how can I even further take advantage of that? And so I wanted the character who Finn plays to be a singer-songwriter. Luckily, Finn is not only a brilliant actor, he also is an amazing singer-songwriter. So he is obsessed with his music. So he plays his music to the bot because his parents are a little negligent. And so this is like his only outlet. And so it's this very sweet, sad, but also kind of like, realistic thing that he would end up playing his music for this robot. And so I was just thinking, like, I want to write something for this medium, and I want it to exist in no other medium, and what could that possibly be?
Well, Finn, tell me about when you first heard of this project and read it. What was your kind of initial reaction to the idea that, one, this was going to get to combine acting and music, but also that it's this, new audio format?
Yeah, I mean, it was something that I'd never done before. Obviously, I was a giant fan of Jesse's, and so I was like, immediately, I got the script for it, and I was just incredibly excited because it was something that I'd never ever seen before. I mean, I did theater when I was younger, and so like, but not like a lot of it, and so this was something where that was like the closest thing I could kind of like compare it to, but it was something that also. It was like Jesse and I would talk in between takes. It's 50% the easiest thing you'll ever do and 50% the hardest thing you'll ever do.
Yes,
something you've never done before, but something that is, once you get it, like the rhythm of it down, it's almost stream of consciousness. And so, once you have a rhythm, it's like a really incredible thing, and you're talking in a booth, and but it's you record for a while, so it starts to get like but tedious, and then like it's like this really, it's almost like it's a really like you're just tugging back and forth between this thing where you're like, am I doing this right? And then you do it and you finish it and you're like, oh, that was fine, that was good, but then you don't really know how it's gonna do or how it's gonna sound. But I remember it was like the most brilliant thing I'd ever read, and so I was like instantly like we're lucky to, Justin and I are lucky to kind of share some of the same agents. And so I got to kind of, our agent, Zach, like sent me the I guess the story, the whole story and Ziggy's stuff. And yeah, I mean, it was kind of, for me, it was like a no brainer. It was kind of everything that I am interested in as a person. It's music, and it's a character I hadn't played before, and it's a medium that I hadn't played in before. So I was really excited to do it.
Well, let's talk through that recording process just a little bit, because obviously these are 3 separate kind of monologues. So everybody is by themselves in the story itself. So you're not, acting opposite each other, but it's also very different than reading an audiobook, for example. So how did you guys figure out how to do these performances, and what was the process of like directing the audio presentations? I know, Jesse, you recorded yours first.
Yeah, and you're right, Angelique. It's not like reading like a novel where you're kind of a third person or a fly on the wall, or or even a first person in a traditional novel. It's really meant to be monologues in a kind of really, theatrical radio play style, just at a much longer length. That's what makes it so interesting. Like, I've done radio plays and I've done plays that we recorded, but those are usually just traditional theater, like kind of awkwardly adapted for an audio medium, and you lose something, obviously, because you're not seeing it or somebody is narrating it, which then breaks the kind of emotional engagement. So this was really just kind of monologues, confessional monologues. They're written to be monologues. Three people are confessing something that they would never tell anybody else to their devices. And so it's really meant to be three people alone in their rooms doing this thing. And to what Rachel was saying too, like there's something about listening to it that has this forced intimacy, and you kind of like, whereas in a movie and a play, you have to kind of gradually ease the audience into this, fantasy, this, suspension of disbelief. Whereas there's like this immediate intimacy because they're in your mind. You can rewind, you can fast forward. I hope not. You can play something again. And so you're in a way kind of like just forced into this intimate emotional relationship with somebody from the first moment. And we recorded it. Yeah, I recorded mine first. Then we flew to Vancouver and recorded Finn. And then a global pandemic struck and we recorded Caitlin Deaver, the other wonderful actor in this project, from her closet in Burbank. And I was in my closet in Indiana. I didn't have to be in my closet because I was not being recorded, but, it was kind of, it was empathic.
Just as a team player, he likes to, even if he's in his giant place in the Hamptons, which he owns.
Yeah.
He loves to rough it with us.
He's like, I'll get in my closet here. It's the size of your whole house, but it's,
right, exactly,
exactly. But it's technically is a closet because my clothes are there.
It's a walk-in. It's a typical walk-in. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Finn, what was it like when you guys? How did you guys collaborate? Did you kind of take on, Jesse, a role of like director in the recordings, or how did you guys work that out?
Well, it's interesting. Like when I first started talking to Jesse, it was he just sent me. We didn't really talk about the character much. I think the first thing we kind of started talking about was the music, weirdly, because I think that was on purpose because that's the character I play, Ziggy. That's his entire existence in life, and he only lives for that. And so Jesse wrote these great songs and kind of taught them to me, and I would practice them before he flew to Vancouver, and then I just came and we hung out for a bit at the studio and just talked, and it was a really organic thing. I kind of just jumped into it, and it's also because Jesse's an actor as well and a performer. You don't feel like it's someone who obviously, like, you have a director, and they obviously always. They know what they're doing, but sometimes you get someone that you feel like you don't understand, but they don't understand you in a way of like just being a performer and what to do. But Jesse knows that in spades. So it was really like comforting because I didn't feel like I was, even though it was a completely different medium, I didn't feel like I was in a different world because Jesse just treated me like a fellow performer. And it was actually really great because what was great about it, I mean, if it was like a live radio play, like War of the Worlds or whatever, it would have been, I think, completely different. But but we ended up going in the booth, and I would just kind of do a long run of like a stanza or 2 pages or something like that, and then we'd kind of Jesse would just listen for the best parts and say, okay, we got those now, like let's go back and clean it up. So we just kind of like do one long run, and I'd get some pieces, and then we'd go back and kind of do it again. And so it was like a really like fun, but like it was like incredibly fun, but it was like something that I was just like so unsure about because you feel like, but also in a weird way, I'm always talking to Jesse too, because it's like the most like intimate you can be with a director, because there's no when you're in a movie, you have to do the entire scene, and if you did something wrong, the director has to come up to you afterwards and give you notes. But you just do a line, and I'm like, did I pronounce that word right? And he's like, yeah, you're fine.
Yeah.
So it was very like weird and fluid, but really awesome. I enjoyed it a lot, but I would come out and be like, was that fun? Are we doing well?
You're like, is this connecting with anybody?
Yeah,
And you're
yeah.
like, I guess so. And it also doesn't like require a whole like multi-company move if you have to like redo something. We don't have to reset for lights and
great. Yeah, it was, and that's why I was saying like it wasn't a live radio play, so we had the option to just hang out and go back and take breaks, and so yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, you also realize very quickly as an actor like how infrequently you actually speak in movies and television. Like when you do this, like you know, in one page you would do way more dialogue than you would do on a day on on Stranger Things or or something like that. I mean, I don't need to call that Stranger Things, but the truth is there's a lot more going on. I'm on a TV show where there's like a million things happening, and here you're just so it's kind of like this almost like really exhausting by comparison process of chatter. But so we would Finn would sometimes get through 10 pages and that would be amazing. And then sometimes we'd be on a paragraph for an hour. That's just the nature of how these things work.
Yeah.
And we'd go back 2 months later and do that same paragraph again because it wasn't exactly feeling right. But those 10 pages that we breezed through without a break are perfect. And so it's just a very unusual process that doesn't seem to have any kind of analog in another medium.
Yeah, and I remember there was a specific moment where I kind of looked up from the booth and I was like, this is just because hard. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I did this when I did this. I performed in this too, so I know exactly what it's like.
Yeah.
I feel like I can tell you exactly how hard it was because I also did it.
Mm-hmm.
But also, it was like the best. I also don't want it to make it sound like it was a tedious mess that took it's like it was really the most. I mean,
no, it's physically taxing. It is a physically taxing process.
Yeah.
I've done several audiobooks.
You're sitting in the booth the whole time.
Yeah.
But it's really, it's great. But it was a really fun process. So.
Well, Rachel, Jesse brought up earlier that whole idea that midway through the production of this, there is, of course, a global pandemic. So from the Audible side, when it comes to producing this new content in this new format, how did that change plans? Or maybe it didn't even change any sort of plans, but how did that affect how the business end looked at it?
It definitely changed plans. I think for us, it was really amazing that Jesse was so hands-on. So the plan was to continue that and kind of record the third act in the same way. And so when the pandemic hit, one of the things we were most interested in was keeping things going. So we figured out how to create a recording studio at home. We called it like a studio in a box. Many of them happened in closets because actually it's kind of hard to get the right sound capture like in any space outside of the closet. So a lot of it happened there. And it was funny reflecting back and kind of listening to the audio and listening to even Finn's kind of recount of his experiences. I actually think there was something somewhat personal about that space. And maybe I'm just reflecting a bit because my name's Rachel and the character's Rachel. And I was in a new relationship and I was like listening to a lot of what she was saying and connecting, but there was something like super personal about what she was saying. And perhaps being in a closet like helped her connect to that space, right? Because you don't see anything on screen, but you actually don't hear anything when you're recording either. You're kind of one with that character, you're one with that narrative, and you're just there. And in the spirit of all things being present, I just think that there's like a real presence about that. And when I started listening to some of the tape back, I was a little nervous on whether or not the experiment of a home studio would work. But as I was listening, I was like, there's something magical about this time. So a little off what we were expecting, but I feel like it completed things somehow the way that they were meant to be anyway.
I like what you're saying. Oh, please go ahead, Finn.
Oh no, I was just gonna say it's something like I just thought of this like quote that Jerry Seinfeld said about about his show. I don't know if it's Seinfeld. It's his last name as well.
Okay, yeah, it was.
Oh yeah, I'll have to check that out. Thanks.
He says something
hospital
like,
room.
we got the last, like he's talking about how TV changed, and it says like they got the last tickets to Disneyland before it burned down, which is like, oh, in a way like how it felt, because it was the last project that I did before the pandemic, kind of. And or I think I went to Atlanta to shoot Stranger Things for a week, and it got shut down. But it was like full on. It was just starting, and we were all having conversations about it. Like, do you think it'll be fine? It was us just, like trying to hope for the best, and just like, well, nothing's gonna, it'll be fine. And but we had a good time. So
when you guys have been like talking about a lot of the intimacy of these stories, I did find myself when I was listening, you feel sometimes when you're taking it in, like you're the therapist and you're kind of like psychoanalyzing the characters. And then you find yourself at other times being like, oh yeah, no, I've had those exact same thoughts and feelings like Rachel, you were just talking about. That kind of personal narrative that this creates does feel so different from an audiobook or a radio play. Jesse, for you as the author, how were you expecting this to resonate with people, or thinking that people might resonate with it, and how have you seen it be received?
Yeah, it was really strange. Like I was saying earlier, because there's no like canon of like original audio presentations. Like I didn't know, should this be, half the length? Should it be tiny? Should it be very long? What is the attention span of a human being in this kind of medium? And so, my background as a writer is in theater, so I am very much aware of the constraints of this medium. Like, you can't have a play that's over 3 hours. You can't have a play in the tone that I write, which is kind of darkly comic, like that's over 2.5 hours, because people will hate the characters. And so like I'm just kind of like pretty aware of that. And with this, but I always overwrite my plays. My plays are always like 50 pages more than they should be, and I have to cut it out after the first read through, because people are falling asleep. And so like with this, I felt like I can kind of write everything that I've always wanted to for characters, because there's so much more flexibility and so much more allowance, because people can stop and start it. They can listen to it when they want. When I asked Audible about the length, they said, and not only length, but clarity. When I asked Audible, like, how many times do I have to mention that this person is in college for them to understand the context? Yeah. They said one thing that was so completely clarifying for me, which is that people know how they listen. People know how they personally take in listening. And it occurred to me, because I listen to I listen to Audible. I also listen to podcasts. I know like my most focused time of listening is when I'm doing the dishes. I don't know why, but like when I'm doing the dishes, I am the most focused. Like I remember everything from a time I was doing the dishes and nothing from a podcast that I was listening to in my own bed. So like, with nothing else to do. And so there's something about this medium that allows for more flexibility, because people are kind of monitoring themselves and calculating how it is that they best absorb a story. And so I was able to have this very freeing experience of writing everything I wanted to write, knowing that people will take it in the way that they're going to, and I don't have to account for that. I don't have to account for a 2.5 hour attention span like you would in a movie, or at maximum, or a play. So that and then in terms of how people are receiving it, yeah, people receive it just like, I frankly try to insulate myself from that, because I just find it unnerving. Even if somebody says something nice, I think it's completely incorrect, and how could they undermine me so horribly? But I don't know. I just hope that my friends like it. That's why I end up writing for. You write for the people that like know your other things and can contextualize it in a way that feels generous to you, and that you feel like you're growing in your own craft or whatever. So in that regard, my friends were happy, and I loved hearing the other actors do it. I love actors as much as I love acting, and so like it was so wonderful for me to hear somebody like Finn, or specifically Finn, but somebody as great as him, who's both like so natural, and who's just incredibly like, is the word preternaturally talented, just so ahead of his time in terms of his own sense of humor and skill set. And then Caitlin too, somebody who has such a deep well of pathos, but yet a great self-aware irony. And that's exactly what the character is that she's playing. And so it was just like a kind of wonderful experience in multiple ways, and a lot of that had to do with just the very freeing form of what Audible has kind of concocted.
Yeah. Rachel, on a business end, kind of speaking to that same point, what do you think makes a story like this work so well? And what kind of are you looking for when you develop further audio dramas?
So there is a couple points that resonate for me when I hear Jesse speak, which the first one is, it's really about the story. So we don't necessarily have the boundaries of time or format. So what it's really about is somebody who has a passion for something that they want to say. And then it's just a matter of bringing that thing to life. So usually when I go into a pitch, we'll get pitched, a number of different stories, and I'll be like, there's something interesting there, but what do you want? Like, what do you care most about? What's that thing that's been on your mind? And what is that thing that maybe you haven't found a home for, or that thing that's been gnawing at you? And how can we make that a reality? And I think that that's what works the best in audio. There's something about the imagination that the customer brings. When someone's listening, you're building the world around you and you're resonating it within yourself. Like, none of that comes with the story. It's really just about the story. So the things that I find that work the best are the things that are just a naturally good story. And I think naturally good stories from creative people come when they don't have those boundaries and they can just create kind of what's in them. And when you start to feel that come to life, I feel like that's when the magic happens.
And then, of course, something that's additionally special about this project is that it is now in development to become a film. And you're kind of taking the story itself and turning it a bit on its head to create the film version of this project. So I guess, Jesse, I'll start with you. How is the film version of this story going to be different?
Oh, yeah, it's very different. We actually start in a week. We start filming in a week. So Finn and I are both in Albuquerque. After I finished the book, I was trying to think about what I wanted to write next. And I realized there was a character in the story that I hadn't seen, but wanted to see, which is Rachel, which is our, character that Caitlin plays in the third act, but as Finn's mother, which is 30 years after we hear from her. She's a woman who at 50 is, running a domestic violence shelter, and she's a kind of progressive activist with a son who Finn plays, who is really interested in making money online playing music for people. And he's very talented and he's very good at what he does, but he's taken a completely different path than what his mother would have hoped for. And they're both great at what they do. They're both very similar in personality, but they both resent each other because they're completely lacking in what the other one values in the world. And so the movie is kind of about those two characters. So some of what you hear in the book is in the movie, but half of it, I would say, is completely new. And then the interactions are obviously all new because you're seeing it from this new person's perspective. But it was really great because, I spent so much time writing the book and I had thought so much about it. There was so much, because it was a new medium, I kept experimenting with sections that weren't working. Mm-hmm. Some of them are still included in the audiobook, but I was able to take those sections and kind of just use my imagination, just not that I was able to take them out of the garbage, but I had thought about them already. So when I was writing the movie, there was so much that I knew about these characters that I was never able to flesh out in the book. So that's how it's different. And also there's a visual component.
How did you know exactly what I was thinking? I was thinking about all of those excised paragraphs that I've left on the cutting room floor that I was like, I would love to be able to take those and turn them into something else.
It would just be horrible to have to write something new. Yeah, so. Yeah.
Well, Finn, for you, taking that audio performance to now bringing it to the film screen, what is it like kind of re-workshopping the character of Ziggy for the film?
Well, it's interesting because when I was doing the audio book, or the Audible original, I guess we're not calling it an audio book because it's not that. But so when I was doing that, it's funny. I wasn't really the most that I was thinking about Ziggy was I would think about when I think about the character, obviously as I was talking, but I would think about like the most I would think about the characters after the sessions were done, like what's happening in between that time. And he kind of recaps it obviously in each monologue, but I mean, like, the thing that was really interesting to me is like what happens when Ziggy goes home. You know, what are those conversations like with his mom? What are they really like? Is he a unreliable narrator? Is he, you know, all these things? And so, I mean, when I got the script and when Jesse wanted me to do it, I literally said, I texted him and I said, I'm in, no questions asked. And he said, really? You should probably ask some questions. Like, you definitely shouldn't take it like that. And I read, I mean, it's the same thing. I read the script and I just like it's the tone is my favorite thing about movies. It's a movie about a relationship that is dark and drama filled, but also hilarious because of inherently the kind of people the way these people are. It's been really fun for Jesse and I to actually like go into these scenes and really like act it out, because there was something, you know, as an actor, when you're in the booth, you're thinking about Ziggy is basically in a pod the whole time. He's talking to a robot. He's not like talking to, you know, he's venting to an AI. And so as an actor, the only thing you're really thinking of is like closing your eyes and thinking that you're in this little pod. But what's great about doing this movie is like you're outside of the pod now, and you can see the entire world around him, and it just digs deeper, just a little bit deeper, because you see you see Rachel. I mean, Rachel is now, you know, you see the mom's point of view, and it's a really, I mean, it's a really amazing thing. So I'm excited to play it.
But we still are getting the same amount of slanguage, right? Because I'm going to potentially be like integrating like chalky and things into my vocabulary.
That's funny. That I don't want to. I mean, I don't even want to say if there is or not. I don't know.
No, there's some slanguage, but the which is, I like that. That is slanguage in and of itself, which is kind of very meta of you, Angelique. No,
very,
this is
very Inception.
Yeah, sorry. The movie takes place in like modern day. That has more to do with like not being able to afford flying cars, and also, yeah, mainly.
There's kind of always like a thing about going too far into the future, though, because you don't really know what 2032 would be like. So modern day also just makes sense.
Yeah, yes. You know, mostly a budgetary thing.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what it would be like. We just couldn't afford it. That's the other thing is like, I spent like so much time researching like futurism, you know, and then like a pandemic hit, and like so everything I was researching, I mean, there was a lot about like universal basic income, and is that going to be necessary because there's only going to be 4 companies, one of which is Amazon. Thank you. And is everybody going to be on, you know, like a universal basic income? And then the pandemic hit right when we were recording it, and suddenly that became like this actual thing. So there's a big storyline about UBI in the book, and that's how the parents make the money, and that's how the friends make the money, and then there's like a different ethical rubric that they use to judge people who are taking UBI, and like you only get it if you do social service work, because there's no capitalism. And so anyway, there was all this stuff that then happened in 2020 by virtue of so many things closing. So yes, I couldn't predict 2032 as much as I could predict 2020.
Yeah. And not at all to say anything about the script, because I want people to see it. But there's something that's incredible about Jesse's writing, that is he wants it to be timeless. I don't know if that's like a thing that he thinks about when he, you know, Jesse's right here. I'm talking like he's not here, but you know, but I think that this movie is set in 2020, but it's not a 2020 movie, if that makes sense. Like it's not. There's not plot devices in the movie that ages it at all, and almost it could have been made at any time because it's just about these people, but it just so happens that it takes place during this year. And so that's also a thing that I really appreciate about the writing, is that it's not a gimmicky in the way of timing.
I might interject there and just say there's a story about humanity and people interactions, and I think regardless of the world around us, that interaction is there. So that story of how a mother relates to her daughter or her son or her husband. Like
Yeah.
all of that is there, regardless of what the world looks like around it. And I think that's part of what makes it so beautiful.
Yeah, one of the things I was trying to also write about was like the kind of the cultural conflict that we're currently in. We're in obviously divisive times like nothing I've ever seen, certainly, or my parents have ever seen even. And I wanted to in some way write about that, but obviously you don't want to write about now because it feels too soon and it feels too trite to kind of make a kind of angry comment about the current moment through fiction, at least in my opinion, because it feels undigested. But I wanted to address it in some way, and so the character that Caitlin is playing in 2002 is again on a liberal campus in southern Indiana, which is where I live, and kind of coming into her own intellectually as a young woman would in the freshman year of college, coming from a rural Indiana town. And her boyfriend is obviously about to be deployed to Iraq, and so she's incredibly supportive of the war just by virtue of having her heart in it. And yet she's on a campus that's kind of having this burgeoning protest movement, as it would, and she can't separate out her emotional feelings from her intellectual curiosities about the validity of the war. And it occurs to me, having grown up in New York and New Jersey, but now living in Indiana for reasons that it will take forensics teams to figure out. Is that there is certain cultural aspects of the Midwest that I didn't experience, that I have a cynical attitude towards, that I don't have to confront, that people in the Midwest do, and obviously they similarly wouldn't know about my experiences. But I wanted to kind of address that cultural moment in the year 2002, and in that way, I mean, I wouldn't call it timeless or anything, which is a very sweet adjective for it, but I will say, like, it just kind of you see how history repeats itself in a way that allows for a certain kind of lack of datedness to, that it doesn't feel dated because history repeats itself with very similar cultural tropes and very similar cultural conflicts.
Yeah, it's just about just really paying attention to the larger picture of what kind of happens in society. And as we're kind of wrapping up this conversation, I would like to ask a larger picture question about this story and really the idea of how it represents this new, in some ways, content pipeline and the different ways that you can tell stories and have stories be made. And Rachel, I would kind of like to start with you on that question and the idea that this can go from story to audio drama to film and what that means on the Audible end when it comes to the business of storytelling.
So I very much love the adaptation of a story, regardless of how it goes, from a book to an audiobook, to an Audible original, to a film, to a TV show and back. I love adaptation. And I think part of that is, again, if you center around the story and something that you're connected to, also talks a little bit about, the ability for history to repeat itself or a story to find itself relevant again. There's just so many ways to re-examine something in a different perspective that it becomes super interesting, and it also kind of re-grounds you back to that original story. I'm the queen of Wikipedia watching, so I'm often like watching a show and like Wikipedia everything I could find out about it. And I think, whenever you respond to something, your natural instinct is to look at it in a different view or get a different perspective on it. And I think adaptation allows for that. Of course, this type of adaptation I love the most, which is you get to see a different perspective. If it's just a straight, I'm going to read the same thing I read, but now with a screen, I don't think it gives you quite the same illumination. But I love this because I'm super interested to see, Rachel in present time with her son and how they're interacting. Like, I want to see that. So I'm really excited to see how this responds and how this develops.
And also, like, you get to be a little surprised as well because you don't necessarily know where the story is going. Finn, were you surprised to see the way the story changed?
I wasn't really surprised, but I was like, I really connected to the characters, and just going back to what like Rachel said about adaptation, I think I totally agree with that. And I also think like, really, really weird way, it's almost the way that Jesse did this made it a much smoother transition to make it a movie, because there was another step that I don't think people do. It's usually, if it's a book or a graphic novel, it goes from straight there to the movie. And sometimes there can be some filters that they don't pass through. And this is something where it just kind of like it naturally ended up going through this, like, from the story to this filter that kind of got it filtered this, did this incredible thing, and then it filtered out the movie through there. And I think that's like a really interesting thing that I don't think is done very often. You can't, I don't know. There's podcasts and then they go to movies. But there's no like podcast that then goes to an Audible original that then goes to what's it called. But maybe movies would be better like that, because you have more time to just tinker with it and do something different. Your original question, I wasn't very surprised, but I was
Audible original question.
Yeah.
And don't worry, it wasn't actually a very original question, if we're being honest. So go for it.
But no, I love the script, and I'm very excited. So.
You know what, Finn, I would be happy if everything came through an Audible original.
I know.
Like, go ahead and
Yeah.
I'd be happy about that.
Yeah. It's really interesting. Imagine if like a lot more books went through Audible, or not books, but just stories, and then went through Audible and then to another thing. It'd be a very different adaptation world.
Agreed.
Well, Jesse, I'll let you have the last word on that, and how you how this kind of changed your ideas and your perceptions of how content can filter through the different pipelines.
Yeah, I think like what Audible's doing, similar to like, a lot of these kind of platforms, or that kind of disrupt the I guess that's the kind of like negative connotation word, but also alter and allow for different, for flexibility, are just like kind of are wonderful. I know, I guess they cannibalize some old formats, but they also provide like people who are on the creative side to finally do things that they wanted to do, that they were stifled. And then in retrospect, you think, my goodness, everything prior to this new format was exactly the same. When you watch Finn's show on Netflix, you realize, my God, every science fiction show prior to this moment was the exact same length of time with the same exact commercial breaks, and how stifling that could be. Of course, it's also wonderful. Of course, there are many wonderful creations within that framework, but how wonderful that we don't have to worry about that anymore. And so with this experience, I had that, kind of revelation that this new format is like something I wish I could have done earlier. I wish I could have written these monologues when I first started writing plays, and constantly had to castrate these monologues that I was writing. Not that they were so brilliant, but it was just the thing that I liked. And so I, in some ways, like kind of, so valued this experience, and look forward to whatever, they come up with next.
Well, I am looking forward to seeing more from this story. And like you said, more of what Audible Originals comes up with next, because let's be honest, I'm a longtime Audible listener, and thank you all for giving us the Mariah Carey audiobook, because it needed to
in the
happen.
room. Thank you, Angelique.
Finally, someone said something.
You said it. Yeah.
Somebody had to say what needed to be said. That's why we're all actually here. She's bankrolling the whole thing.
Yes, she's just nonstop, blah, blah, blah. About this Mariah Carey thing.
How did she record that Christmas song?
I know.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us for this conversation. And please make sure to tune in if you have not already listened to the Audible original drama when you finish Saving the World. Thank you, Jesse, Finn, and Rachel.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Angelique. Thanks so much.